every year they do the pre-rankings, and there used to be a time when, Clemson and Gamecocks, they were close, but now Clemson always is up there near the top of the preseason ranking, and I always hated that. Because one thing you never want to be is like number 1, 2, or 3, but you really don't want to be number 1. It sounds really nice, but the whole season, what happens? There's a target over that. Everybody wants to take down number 1. So if you start out number 1, you might not finish number 1. It's not a fun thing to be, and that's pretty much true in anything. You don't necessarily want to be in the lead. You want to be the underdog, surprises somebody at the end. Because when you're number 1, the target's always on your back. Well, today, as we talk about a target on your back, it's not about necessarily being number 1. It's about following Jesus and following the Lord, especially in David's case. Of course, he's before Christ, but he's still with God. And the same faith that David has in God is the same faith that Abraham had in God. And it's the same type of faith that it says saves us. But by faith, he was counted righteousness. That was Abraham. By faith, David is in that same boat. And so today, after the cross, we look back and we place our faith and our trust in Jesus. But in doing so, we do put a target on our back. And we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. We'll start in 1 Samuel 18, verse 1. We'll just read the first 9 verses, and I'll try to fill in the story as I take gaps. But start in verse 1. It says this. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the son of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day, and he would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him, and he gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war, and it was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with the tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated, Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they've ascribed to David 10,000, to me they've ascribed thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Well, shortly following that in chapter 18, you're going to see that David is sitting in with Saul, and a harmful spirit comes upon Saul, and Saul throws a spear at him to kill him. David gets out of the way, and he grabs the spear and throws it twice. And then twice was enough for David. He runs, he flees. Ultimately, he comes back. You're going to see Saul placing him in charge of armies, hoping that if he puts him constantly in warfare, David will get killed. He's still trying to see David killed. And then you're going to see him try to marry off his daughter. So I was wrong. It wasn't 19. It was chapter 18. But Saul actually tries to marry off his oldest daughter to David. And he turns it down because he says that he's not worthy. He's not royalty. He's just a shepherd boy. He can't be marrying her. And so Saul tries again with a younger daughter. And his whole reason, get this, he thought his daughter would be a stumbling block to David. Right? If I married one of my girls off, I don't know what he was thinking. I'm thinking he must be saying, boy, they're a bunch of brats anyway, so they'll really ruin David, right? And that's what he thought. He thought that these daughters would be a stumbling block to David, that they would drag him down either with idolatry, we'll talk about that a little bit, or simply taking Saul's side. And ultimately, there's going to be a plot to try to kill David even at his own house. That happens when they try to come to David to get him at his house. And they come, they say, we're going to get him in the morning when he gets up. And the daughter that David finally married said, you got to get out of here. And that's what she did. She lowered David through a window and let him run away. She put a dummy in the bed and put goat hair on it so they think there was something in the bed. And then in the morning, they all came in. They found it. They seen what it was. They took the daughter to Saul. And he said, why have you done this? And she makes up a lie, but ultimately she did it to save him. But she said, he threatened to kill me, so I had to let him go. But regardless, she lets David go. So you see all through these chapters, Saul is going to keep trying to kill David. And it doesn't end in chapter 20, but here it just keeps it kind of tight. So in chapter 19, David comes back, but they go back to war again. And the harmful spirit comes upon Saul again, and once again throws a spear at him. So that's 3 spear tosses at David to try to kill him. And so David runs away this time, and this is where he comes to his house. But after he escapes through that window, it says he flees to Samuel. And that's what we'll pick up in chapter 19, verse 18. Chapter 19, verse 18. I'm telling you, you got to read through these chapters, though. You'll see it's a weave of just, it's not necessarily complicated, but it is drama, drama, drama. And then we get here in verse 18. Now David fled and escaped in chapter 19. And he came to Samuel at Ramah, and he told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and lived at Noeth. And it was told Saul, Behold, David is at Noeth and Ramah. Then Saul sent messengers to take David. And when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing his head over them, the Spirit of God came upon the messengers of Saul. He sent the other messengers, and they also prophesied. And Saul sent messengers again a third time, and they also prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah, and he came to the great well that is in Succoth. And he asked, Where are Samuel and David? And one said, Behold, they are at Naioth in Ramah. And he went there to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God came upon him also. And as he went, he prophesied, until he came to Naioth in Ramah. And he too stripped off his clothes. He too prophesied before Samuel, and lay naked all that day and all that night. And thus it said, Is Saul also among the prophets? And then in chapter 20, we read this, beginning in verse 1. Then David fled from Noah and Ramah. And he came and said before Jonathan, What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father, that he seeks my life? And he said to him, Far from it. You shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, either great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so. But David vowed again, saying, Your father knows well that I found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. Shortly after that, he tries to convince Jonathan. They set up a plan. He says, Jonathan, what I want you to do is I want you to bring me up to your father. And I'm going to miss from this feast. What they were doing is supposed to have a feast, and David was supposed to be there. Well, the first day, David's not there, and Saul doesn't say anything. But ultimately, the whole plan was when Jonathan sees how Saul responds, he's going to know the truth, and he's supposed to come back and give David a signal. So Jonathan agrees to this. Look at verse 24 in chapter 20. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food, and the king sat on his seat, and as at other times on a seat by the wall, Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. David didn't show up. Verse 26. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought something's happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he's not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, Why has not the son of Jesse come to the mill, either yesterday or today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now if I found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. For this reason he's not come to the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, do I not know that you've chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, Why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger, and he ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. And then I just want to read the last two verses, verses 41 and 42. And as soon as the boys had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground, and he bowed 3 times. This is him running to Jonathan. It says, They kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever. And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. Now, I know that's a lot, but I'll make sense of it as we see the first points. And the first point is a simple one: persecution. Chapter 18 starts it off. We read the first 9 verses. David had just taken down the giant Goliath. He had just taken him down. He was the hero. And what happens is, it says right here, we see that him and Jonathan became friends. And this isn't an unlikely friendship. Sometimes we look at it as like, well, obviously the prince, Saul's son, and some shepherd boy. But the reality is they had a lot in common. And just a few chapters ago, Jonathan rebelled against his father and led Israel in an awesome victory. He stood up when nobody else would stand up. And now we have David who stood up when nobody else would stand up. So both of these were men of faith who loved the Lord. And so they immediately became friends. And we see them come together. But Saul takes David's military victory and puts him in charge of everything, which was spoken well of by everybody. They all liked David. The problem is, Saul didn't realize that the Lord was with David, and so no matter what he put his hands to, the Lord was going to make it prosper. And so David did an awesome job in the military service, and so when they get back in town, the ladies aren't necessarily meaning to disrespect Saul, but they were meaning to honor David, and they sang that song. Saul's killed his thousands, but David's killed his 10,000s. Well, as we've seen over a number of chapters in 1 Samuel, Saul's heart has already started to go harder and harder and harder. He's turned from the Lord. He's disobeyed Him over and over again. So now it's open, it's right for greed to set in. And that's exactly what happens. He hears this jealousy that takes place with what's been said about David. He gets angry and he keeps his eye on him. And from that point forward, as we've already went over, he tried to kill him 3 ways. Throwing a spear directly at him, putting him in charge of armies, or sending him on crazy missions, hoping that he'll get killed in battle, and placing his daughter to marry him, which I think is probably one of the most shameful ones, right? Hoping that she'll be a stumbling block to him, that she'll lead him astray, that she'll be the one that'll bring him down. But all through it all, David was simply doing what God had given him to do. He had followed God's will, and he was facing persecution. Of course, I work with the Good News Club with Gary. I help him over at Midway. I just do whatever Gary tells me to do. He's the boss over there. If you know Gary does, I think he's over working with the Sue, but he does about 3 of those things a week. He's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He's at a Good News Club. But on Tuesdays, it's at Midway, and we're there. And we were sitting there this past week, and a lady in our group spoke up. She said, when you Google Good News Club, the first thing that comes up is this group that's against us. Well, that wasn't necessarily true. But if you do Google Good News Club and you scroll down just 1 or 2 spots, you'll find this group called Stand Up, right? And it's this parents group, and all it is I went to the website, and boy, it is constantly against the Good News Club. It accuses the Good News Club of indoctrination, that it's changing the religion of the kids, and that they're doing nothing but tricking these children into saying things about Jesus that they don't really need to be hearing, and they're standing and working hard to make sure Good News Club can't be in the public school system. Right? I guess somebody got mad, and they started a group, and it became an entire organization. And so we were reading through and looking at some of the things it was saying. And like I said, I'm at the Good News Club. I'm not at all of them. But I know one thing. Kids aren't forced to be a part of it. Parents have to sign them up. Right? And they have the option to be there. In our group, nothing's coercive. We share the gospel in its totality. We tell them all about sin. We tell them about Jesus. We offer to talk with them if they want to, but there ain't no pushing or doing anything. In fact, most of the time what I'm doing is cleaning up crumbs, because we had moon pies this last Tuesday, and they got them everywhere. But regardless, they have a good time. We sing songs. We do all of those things. There's nothing forceful about it. And in reality, it's just one more club. You can't be a part. The only reason Good News Club's even allowed in the schools is because they also have this club and this club and this club going on. And so it's something that you volunteer. So all the things that we're saying were completely unfounded. But what I was thinking about is, should we really be surprised? No. Because anytime the Lord's doing something, guess who's always going to be against Him? The enemy. Right? I said it before, I say it again. It's something I learned when I was growing up, but it just stuck with me. And it was this: divine operation always has satanic opposition. That's always true. The fact is that the enemy hates Good News Club, and the enemy has a lot of advocates. There's nobody neutral. Remember that. There's nobody neutral. Some people think, well, I'm not religious, so I don't play in any of that. Well, the Bible tells us that you either serve God or Satan. One you may serve knowingly, but the other you may serve unknowingly. But regardless, there's only 2 sides of this coin. And the reality is that Jesus told us in this world we will have persecution if we serve Him. Now that last point is important. It's about serving the Lord, right? So just being a Christian might not bring you too much opposition. Could you imagine if David had just trembled like the rest of the soldiers? Goliath's out there and he doesn't take down Goliath. He runs scared too. Saul wouldn't have even noticed him. But the thing is, if you're willing to take a stand for the Lord and step out, you will face persecution. You'll have haters. And I know that's a contemporary word, but it's not a contemporary idea, because what did Jesus say? They hated me, they'll also hate you. Jesus had haters. You'll have haters. You'll never make everybody happy. The reality is we are supposed to expect opposition and persecution if we're following the Lord. But then in chapter 19, we see this: preservation. So Saul actively hunts for David. He comes after him, and ultimately David runs off to go spend some time with Samuel, hoping to be protected by him. But you got to remember, by this point, Samuel's an old man. He's also a priest. He's not some warrior. And this place they are isn't a fortress. And you don't go around the prophet and expect it not to be news. So word got out quickly that David was with Samuel, and it didn't take long for Saul to do exactly what he wanted to do, send messengers that were going to go capture David, bring him back, and he's going to be judged. But then this is one of the weirdest scenes in these chapters, probably in this book. He sends 3 groups of messengers, and it says that as they approached Samuel and David, the Spirit of the Lord came upon them, and they began to prophesy. Now, I don't know what they were saying. Don't have a clue. And I also think for a minute, these guys probably weren't that religious. This is kind of weird that all of a sudden the Spirit comes upon them and they prophesy. Well, it doesn't stop there, because what the Bible says? It says Saul decided, well, if 3 can't do it, I guess I got to do it myself. And as he goes to see David and Samuel, it says, on his way the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. And the king strips off his clothes and lies naked day and night before Samuel prophesying. That's weird. That you don't have to have any type of Bible knowledge or scholarship to know. If you read that and it sounds weird, it's because it is weird. Right? But the thing is, it's interesting. And here's one key point. It's a side note. This should be an example of the fact that you can have religious experiences and not have faith in God. A religious experience doesn't necessarily mean everything's right with God. How do we know that? Saul is not right with God. And yet he's prophesying. So the Spirit may do this, but it doesn't mean anything about Saul's heart. This doesn't mean all of a sudden, well, Saul was a very holy guy. No, what we see here is God protecting His people through His Holy Spirit against all probability. It was a miraculous work that God would step in and save His future king and His prophet. And they didn't even have to do anything. I think back when we were studying Hebrews and we were talking about that missionary school, I think it was over in Africa, and these missionaries were surrounded by rebels that were a rebel army that was coming to attack it. The plan was already there. They knew they were going to get attacked that night. And there's testimony after testimony that as the army came up against that school, and they had walls, of course, but it's not a fortress, it's just a wall for general purposes to keep things out. It would have been easy to be taken out. And they had no defenses, these missionaries and these children. It says the army approached and then they retreated. And later when somebody from the army was asked, what happened that night? Why didn't y'all attack the school? They said, well, we were going to, but there were big men in white robes with flaming swords standing on the walls. And we were scared and we ran. And that's just one of many testimonies that took place where against all odds, God sent angels to protect His people. Now, that might sound crazy, that might sound like a fairy tale, but the reality is it's not. Our God is no myth, and His angels are real, and He can do things way and above against everything we can do. So we should expect persecution, but here's the thing, we take heart in the midst of turmoil because God sustains His faithfulness. He's there with you in the midst of it. I love this quote from D.R. Davis. He said this, sometimes the clearest evidence that God has not deserted you is not that you're successfully past your trial, but that you're still on your feet in the middle of it. The reality is God has the ability to preserve you. He has the ability to protect us. And if we trust ourselves, we miss out on it. Today we sung Solid Rock. We said our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. But is that always true for us? Don't we sometimes try to build our hope on lots of other things? Well, I don't know if that one will hold up completely, so let me build my hope in a relationship. Let me build my hope in family. Let me build my hope in money. The reality is all those things are good gifts that God can give, but none of them are the God. None of them are God, and none of them are good places to put your hope. How do we know that? Well, you put your hope in family. I know it's happened in my own family, it happened in yours. You know one thing that can really affect that? Cancer. Sickness. There's nothing we can do to stop that. It's no respecter of persons. We can pray and ask, but the reality is that people can get sick. People can put their hope in money. But you know what can stop that? One big medical bill. All of those things can crumble in a minute. Our hope has to be built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. It stands the test of time. He is the rock of ages. He's the one that we can hide our lives in. He's where our hope rests. He's the one that's never shaken, never changes, that when the world shakes, He stands firm. And I know that if everything around me falls apart, my faith in Him holds secure. Why? Because He's got us. And then finally we see promise. As we get to chapter 20, we see the importance of promise. So David and Saul had become friends, but ultimately they make a covenant with one another. And this covenant's going to play a bigger part, especially in 2 Samuel. As David becomes king, you might remember a fellow by the name of butcher this. Mephibosheth, whatever. You know the guy, right? In the Old Testament, I always mess it up. That's a tongue twister. But the reality is, in that situation, that is actually Jonathan's family. And the thing is back in the day, if you come in and you're the new king, what are you supposed to do? Well, like an old mobster movie, you're supposed to take out all the other family. Make sure nobody else can lead an uprising. But Jonathan and David had made this covenant that they would not harm one another's offspring. So what does David do in 2 Samuel? He honors that covenant. He doesn't only protect and not kill the young man, but he actually makes him a part of his family and invites him to his table. So their friendship is a close one. But Jonathan can't believe that Saul is still trying to kill David. He knew it once, but he thought that was all behind him. Surely they're not still going to do that. And David says, listen, your dad's not telling you, but he is trying to kill me. I'm one step away from death. He's going to throw a couple spears at me. I promise, Jonathan. And so the plan, we didn't read the plan, but I'll tell you the plan. The plan was, once Jonathan heard the response, David was hiding out in the field, and Jonathan was supposed to come out there with one of his servants and shoot some arrows. And if the arrows landed beside David, he meant that he could return. Everything was good. If the arrows went beyond him, then it means you need to leave. Things aren't good. And the boy, he seeks the arrows. Of course, it goes beyond. We heard what happened. Saul wasn't telling Jonathan. Saul says, listen, that boy is a threat to your kingdom, so now you better go get him to me and deliver him. And Jonathan can't believe it. The dad throws a spear at his own son. Jonathan runs out, shoots the arrows far. The boy that's there doesn't know anything about it. He runs, gets the arrows, brings them back. And once the boy leaves, David pops up, Jonathan pops up. They have a touching moment where they say goodbye to one another because they loved one another. And then he says, David, you go. There are two promises in this. Number one, there's the promise between David and Jonathan that stands secure no matter what. But then there's one we don't think about, and it's the promise that David has for Saul. I don't know about y'all, but you only got to throw a spear at me one time. I don't think we're going to be friends anymore. You hear me, Bob? And Bob throws a spear at me, I won't be here next Sunday. Right? Or he won't. One or the other. We'll win. We'll fight to the death. But regardless, no, I wouldn't do it. He gets thrown at twice. He gets trying to kill numerous times. He already knows that they're coming to get him in his house. He knows all this is from Saul. And yet David comes back one more time to do what? See if he can reconcile things with Saul. Jonathan, can you go ask your dad what I can do to make this right? Did I do something wrong? Of course, we know he didn't do anything wrong. There wasn't anything he could do to make it right. But David was not going to harm Saul, and he had a promise, a covenant with Saul. He was going to serve the king as long as Saul was king. Here's the thing, y'all. Promises are only as good as the promiser. We've probably all known people who constantly back out of promises. They don't really intend to keep them when they make them, and you don't really expect them to keep them when they make them either. Right? They promise something, and you don't expect them to show up. But you know one thing even bad, and I don't know if it's just me, maybe this is for everybody. In our culture, we also feel like we have to say the words, I promise. You ever had that before? Somebody tells you they're going to do something and they don't, and afterwards they say, well, I didn't promise you. Like you got to say the words, I promise at the end of it. The reality is that shouldn't be the case. Our statements don't have to be tagged with, I promise. If we say, if you need anything, let me know. Don't you love that one? That's what a lot of people say that. I say that. If you need anything, let me know. Right? If somebody's sick or something. We need to mean that. That means when that person calls you and says, actually, I need you to come over here and pull some weeds up, you don't say, I was just kidding. I didn't really mean it. No. We need to mean it. When we say it, our words need to be promise enough. Thankfully, our God never gives us loopholes to get out of His promises. Could you imagine? I love the testimony that he shared. If you call upon the name of the Lord, you shall be saved. Romans 10 tells us all about that. I can't imagine one day I get to heaven and I say, all right, God, I did that. And He says, oh, yeah, but you didn't say it exactly the way I wanted to say it. So, sorry, too late. No. But see, that's sometimes what we have a tendency to do. We try to find all these ways out of our promises. God doesn't. He keeps His promises, and He never fails to keep them. God's promises are the source of our hope, especially in the hard times. We may be persecuted. We may be experiencing opposition. You may be experiencing God's protection in the midst of a storm. But here's the thing. Even if you ever been there, you know the Lord's with you. He's good. He's giving you joy and peace. But you know what? It still stinks to be in the middle of a storm. And in the midst of even those times, you're trusting God, where should you turn? The promises of God. This is one of the reasons God's Word is so valuable. This is one of the reasons something like the Gideon's ministry is so important for him. How in the world are you going to know God? He told you about it. How in the world are you going to know you can be saved? He said you could. How do I know it's all, He's not going to let me go? He said He won't. His Word is the source of our promises. And one of the main things you need to turn for is not some advice. Even though good advice is great. I have many people in here that I call and ask for advice that are a lot wiser than me. And it's great. But the promises I know that stand true, that will never shake, that will always be right, are right here. So, if you're following the Lord, expect opposition. If you're facing opposition, be faithful. God sustains and preserves those that are His. I'm not saying it's going to be fun, but I'm saying He'll never leave you nor forsake you. And then when things get their hardest, and even before then, remember that you can turn here for a book of promises. When you turn here, you don't find the deadbeat dad who never makes it to anything. You find the Holy Father who's always there. You find the one who doesn't find loopholes out of His promises. You find the one who says, I'll keep my promises even when you don't keep yours. Even when you fail, even when you're faithless, He is faithful. He can't deny Himself.